At this time, then, I'm going to call Representative Josh Bonner to come up and introduce our special guest of the day. Let's give him a hand, please.
Thank you, Tyrone. Good morning. It's great to be here this morning. It's great to see so many faces, some new faces. Tell me your name again, ma'am.
Mary Cheeves.
Mary Cheeves.
Yeah.
And her friend Helen. Mary at one time was the finance director for Newt Gingrich's campaign. So let's give her a hand. We were just discussing that Handel Ossoff race, and she was telling me that something you saw that Ossoff is back at his mom's basement. Is that right? Yeah. That's right. That's a lot of money to spend. Hey, thank y'all so much for being here. Let me just, number one, thank you for the opportunity to serve as your state rep. This being my first term, there's been a lot of lessons learned. I won't kind of go into all those. I want to get to our speaker, but just a couple of quick observations, if I could. Number one of the things that I learned very quickly during my time in the session is this. It is vital that we maintain a Republican majority in the state of Georgia. If this current group of Democrats gets in charge of our state, heaven help us. The days of a moderate Democrat or a conservative Democrat or a Dixiecrat, whatever you want to call it, those days are long gone. There is no moderation on the other side. So it is vital that we maintain that majority. And that's one of the reasons I was so pleased to see the effort by so many people in Fayette County to help Karen Handel get elected. Not only just in phone calls, going and walking the district, but fundraisers for her here in the county. She's always been a good friend of Fayette County, and I think that race really highlights what can happen when the parties across the state get on board and make a concerted effort to get a good conservative Republican elected. Second observation is this. We need to do a better job as Republicans in being Republican and being conservative. There is no doubt that when you look at and you do an honest analysis of the national Democrat platform and the national Republican platform, there's not a whole lot of gray area in there. There's not a whole lot of things that intertwine. They're very different, very distinct. But and when you read our Republican platform, it is very conservative. But we, over time, I don't think have done the best job in really moving our party back to the conservative side. So what we've got to do, in my estimation, is to get more conservative Republicans in various offices, and that's offices at every single level. Because I'll tell you, if we go the other direction, then at some point there'll be no distinction between the Republican and the Democrat Party. So those are just a couple of things, and to that leads me into the opportunity to introduce our speaker for this morning. When I got up to the Capitol, I was given a lot of advice, as you can imagine, some good, some bad. But one of the great pieces of advice that I was given was to find some legislators that you identified with philosophically, so that you could learn from them. And so that when it came down to a vote or an issue that you weren't necessarily completely up to speed on, you could at least rely on some of these folks as to which way they're voting and what their analysis is. And time again, among those names that was mentioned to me is, you've got to get to know this guy named Buzz. And I kept saying, first I kept saying, what is Buzz short for? Buzzard? I didn't know what it was. So it seems kind of odd. So if maybe there'll be a question or two that could get to the bottom of that, because that was never really fully investigated. But I did have an opportunity to get to know Buzz over the course of time in the session, and it really was true. He and I shared similar values. He was certainly very well regarded, very well respected among both sides of the House. And I tell you, when it kind of comes to summing up what I think of Buzz Brockaway, I find it in the book of Proverbs, and it says, "A good name is more desirable than riches, and to be esteemed is better than silver and gold." As I tell you, that's the reputation that Buzz has in the legislature. He is very well respected, very well regarded, and I tell you, I think that's the kind of person that we need in the office of Secretary of State. Every office, there's a responsibility that we hold. The Secretary of State's office contains so much of what you would consider that level of trust. Our corporations, our elections, that very thing that would help to move this state forward. So I would encourage you to get to know Buzz, check out his website, participate, volunteer, donate. He currently represents the 102nd District, that's Lawrenceville and Suwannee. He was elected back in 2010. He's served on various committees that he'll discuss, but a lot of the legislation he's worked on are things like trying to prevent human trafficking, helping to shore up our election laws, and areas regarding school choice. So Buzz is a solid, true conservative, and I'm glad to know him. I'm proud to be his friend, and I hope you would help me welcome him to the stage. Buzz Brockaway.
Well, good morning. Let me turn the microphone on real quick I'm getting the sign back there. How's that? Can you hear me now? All right, great. Thanks. Well, thank you for having me here today. And Josh, thank you very much for that kind introduction. And, I served in the House, as Josh mentioned, for 7 years now. And I was one of Matt Ramsey's deputy whips when he was the whip for a little while. And I was joking with some folks earlier that, when you have a representative that you respect and he says, well, I'm not going to run again, you're kind of worried. It's like, oh, man, what's going to happen? Who are we going to get? And we were really blessed. Josh has come in his first session here and done a great job and come in and I think represented all of y'all very well in the fighting for the things that you care about and fighting for the conservative legislation that we all want that is going to advance our party. And Senator Harbin, it's good to see you. This county's well represented with Senator Harbin in the Senate and folks like Josh in the House, and it's a blessing to serve alongside them and stand alongside them as we try to advance good things for Georgia and advance the conservative cause. Josh mentioned that I've served in the House for 7 years now. I live in Lawrenceville, as he mentioned, and we've. As I started to pull up, I felt it right at home because I looked out there and I see right next door to you here is an Indian restaurant and hookah place, hookah bar, whatever they call it. And I'm in Gwinnett County, and we are probably the most diverse county in Georgia, definitely in Georgia, maybe one of the most diverse in Gwinnett County. So I saw that and I thought, man, I'm right at home. I feel right at home here. We see that all the time, and it's great. And that it really, I think, demonstrates one of the things that's really great about Georgia is that people from all over the world want to move here and want to be a part of this community and the great things that we have going on in Georgia. And I think it presents a real opportunity for us in the Republican Party. And I'll hit a little more on this as we talk about elections, but I've always been one who's believed that conservatism is for everybody, and the conservative principles that we hold are for everybody. And it's our challenge as the Republican Party to take that message to all corners of Georgia. And no matter where anybody's from, or no matter where they were born, or wherever they came from, they all live here now. And I think it's the challenge for us is our party moving forward. If we're going to continue to be the majority party in this state, we've got to convince our fellow citizens from all over the world who have moved here to join us that the conservative principles are the best, and the conservative principles are great for everybody. I mean, folks move here because they want to start their own business, like this gentleman right next door, right? He wanted to start his own business. They're concerned about family and what kind of education are they going to get. So they come because of our great schools, and they want the opportunity to. In many times, people come to this country because they can't practice their faith like they want to, so they come to the United States because they can. And so this is just one of the things that makes Georgia awesome, and. I just want to encourage you as a Republican Party to continue to reach out and take that conservative message everywhere. As Josh mentioned, I'm running for Secretary of State, and a couple of things about me. I've been married for 24 years to my wife, Krista. She's really, truly my best friend. I've got 3 teenage daughters, so y'all pray for me. But it's awesome. They're fantastic kids, and they're growing up, and it's exciting to see. I've got a lot of pink in my house and a lot of Barbies. But for about 30 years, I worked in the manufacturing business. About 20 of those years, I worked as a operations manager, and we worked to try to make the processes more efficient. I went to Georgia Tech. I know Josh has, in my honor, he's wearing his little Georgia Bulldog shirt there. But I did go to Georgia Tech. And a little bit about the name Buzz, actually. It's a nickname. My real name's George, but if you call me George, I won't answer because I don't know who you're talking about. I've always been called Buzz. And I had an uncle with that nickname, and my dad liked it, and so it stuck on me. But when I was at Georgia Tech, people would think I was the mascot. And so, no, I'm not that well coordinated. I can't do all those backflips. But one funny little tidbit, serving with Josh and I in the house is a guy named Bert Reeves from Marietta, who was Buzz. He was the mascot. And anyway, it's great to serve with him too. But anyway, that's where Buzz comes from. So Buzzard, it's not Buzzard. But it's an honor for me to be here today, and a couple of the committees that I serve on that I'll note of interest. The Governmental Affairs Committee is one of the committees that I served on, and I was the vice chair of that committee for several years. And we deal with elections as one of the things we deal with, and I was glad to work with Secretary Brian Kemp on several bills. One of the bills we got passed into law allows people to register to vote online using their driver's license. And if you go talk to your local elections officials, that's a tremendous help. They don't get this mounds of paper ballots coming in anymore. People do it with their driver's license, and it helps people register to vote. So those are the kind of things I've been working on. I also got a bill passed last year to allow people to college students to carry stun guns on campus for their personal protection. So I know the governor, and I'm glad he did. We just signed it's just going into effect today, actually, the right for people to carry 21-year-olds who obtain a concealed carry permit to carry a firearm on campus. And I think that's a good thing, and I'm glad that bill passed. The great thing about that is obviously students, no longer can we say that their Second Amendment rights end at the college campus. That continues on, and all the constitutional rights apply to the college campus as well. But with the stun gun bill, we expanded it to even allow 18-year-olds to carry it on campuses too. So providing options for people is something that I think is very important. So why am I running for Secretary of State? Well, there's a number of reasons that I'm running, and probably elections is probably the most visible part of the Secretary of State's office. That's what gets Brian Kemp in the news. That's what gets him sued all the time. And we've certainly seen a lot of lawsuits, and I think, unfortunately, as we move forward in this state, the Democrats are targeting this state, as you well know. The Karen Handel-Ossoff race that was referenced earlier, they poured tremendous money and resources in there because they wanted to send a signal that they think that they can flip Georgia back to a Democratic state. And that's another part of the challenge of us, is to continue to win elections and get our folks out to the polls and expand our base and our message. But as we move forward in the state, I think you're going to see more and more lawsuits, fights over elections. You look at a couple of the things that happened in the 6th District race. You had a lawsuit filed to reopen voter registration after the deadline had passed. And, that might be a great idea. My problem with it is we were changing the rules in the middle of the game. And that's the problem with that. If Democrats had introduced a bill and said, hey, we think that when there's a runoff, you should reopen voter registration, the public could have come and debated it. We could have examined it. We could have figured out, all right, is this a good idea, a bad idea? How do you implement it? But they didn't do that. Instead, they went and they found a judge, and they got that judge to issue an injunction and change the rules of the game in the middle of the game. And they weren't doing it because of fairness or because of access or any of that. They're doing it because they thought it would help John Ossoff. You also had the DeKalb County Elections Board, which opened early voting places that were during the runoff that were not open during the primary. And this was done, again, at the behest of activist groups who were supporting John Ossoff. They weren't doing it to try to make it easier for people in DeKalb County to vote. They were doing it because they thought if we put this over here in a heavily Democratic area, the Democrats will show up and vote and John Ossoff will win. So I think the challenge, one of the big challenges for Secretary of State is to fight against those things. Unfortunately, both parties do it, but we need a Secretary of State who is going to stand firm against any effort to twist or manipulate or find judges or twist the law to gain partisan advantage. And that's a big problem. And if I'm Secretary of State, I'm going to vehemently oppose any of those efforts. We have a tremendous opportunity here. Our voting machines are old. Okay, they were purchased back in the early 2000s, and most of our machines are about 15 years old. Some of them, as we approach the 2020 presidential election, are going to be 18 years old. They're old technology. And you just think about what your telephone was like in 2002 versus what it's like now. Totally different. The technology has advanced tremendously. So we are going, our next Secretary of State, just no two ways about it, is going to have to lead the effort to purchase new voting machines. Now, this is not going to be cheap. This could be very, very expensive. So we're going to have to grapple with that and figure out how to pay for it. Last time, there were federal dollars to pay for it. They won't be here this time because the feds don't have any money. But it's going to present to us a tremendous opportunity to look at everything we do related to elections. I think we need to examine every process we do, the entire voting day experience, early voting, all of this stuff. We need to put it on the table, we need to examine it, and we say, what kind of election system do we want in Georgia? Personally, I want to see us purchase new machines that include a verifiable audit trail, preferably a paper verification, that people can look at and they can see, all right, the screen says this piece of paper here says this, it's the same, I voted for who I wanted to vote for. And if there's a problem, of course, then they can fix it. So these are the kind of challenges that we're going to have to face. Now, I was, to show you kind of what kind of geek I am, I was at a conference week before last in Williamsburg, Virginia. Elections officials and elected officials from across the country who deal with elections were at a conference talking about elections, and we were talking about really geeky stuff about how to shorten wait times at polling places and how to measure that and all that sort of stuff. And it was a great experience, but it showed me a couple of things that present some problems for us here. There are three companies that manufacture voting machines. Of course, the one that we have, Diebold, doesn't even exist anymore. It's been sold and changed hands. That company has sold and changed hands a number of times. But three companies control about 92% of the market. And then I heard that Los Angeles County in Los Angeles is decided they don't like the options that are available in the marketplace, so they're in the process of trying to build their own. So I think that's something we need to put on the table here in Georgia too. We've got the people in Georgia with the skills and the technology and the ability, if we can't find a machine that's on the marketplace that meets our needs and that we want, well, let's build our own. There's about 25,000 machines, I believe, in the state of Georgia, and that certainly would be enough to entice somebody to say, all right, we can build our own. And we can have it built to our specifications. We can have an open and transparent process so that the voters know that this machine and what we're doing here in elections is trustworthy. There was a YouGov poll just recently, a couple weeks ago, that really had some shocking things, and I'll probably get the numbers exactly wrong, but as I recall, it said 58% of Democrats are absolutely convinced that the Russians, not only did the Russians influence the election, that the Russians actually hacked into machines and changed votes. Now, on the flip side of that, we've got 38% of Democrats and about 52% of Republicans who are convinced that there are millions of folks who voted illegally. Now, where the facts are in these cases, we don't really know, and the President, of course, has a commission that's taking a look at that. But what it shows you is that large chunks of this country have no trust and faith in our electoral system, and that's a problem. That's a problem for our republic. That's a problem for every elected official that's in this room. When people look at us and they don't really trust the results, that's a problem. And I think the Secretary of State's office has a solemn duty to do everything we can to restore trust in our electoral system. And that's what I pledged to do. That's what I'm going to do if I'm Secretary of State of Georgia. Now, thank you. One other thing about elections, and then we'll talk about another big part of the Secretary of State's job, and that's data security. You probably all remember a few years ago there was an accidental release of the voter database and attached to that was Social Security numbers. Now, thankfully, it doesn't appear that anybody was harmed. Nobody's identity was stolen. The Secretary of State's office was, under Kemp's leadership, was able to get all that data back. But that caused some concern for me, so I started digging into it. And what I found is there's nothing in Georgia or federal law that requires that we attach Social Security numbers, full Social Security numbers, to somebody's voter information. Federal law only requires the last 4 digits. So to me, one of the first things I'm going to do as Secretary of State, we're going to purge that database of full Social Security numbers. Now, cybersecurity is a huge issue. Anybody who has any sort of data, even on your home personal computer, it's subject to being attacked. So attacks are going to happen, and the Secretary of State's office is under attack all the time from attempted cybersecurity threats. But if the data is less appealing to hackers, right? If it doesn't have your full Social Security number, then if there's an accidental release, the harm is mitigated, and it makes it less appealing for people who want to come and hack. Now, we've heard some stuff in the news recently about this. The Secretary of State's office partners with Kennesaw State University. There's the Elections Assistance Division. They do a number of things. And we've come to find out, there was an article in Politico just last week, and there's also an FBI investigation going on about this. It appears that some vendor was able to access pretty much everything that Kennesaw State has. Voter lists, historical voter data, including information about the schematics and stuff on the machines itself. And so this gentleman happened to be a somewhat good Samaritan, called the Elections Assistance Division and said, hey, this is what I just stumbled upon this, and I've got all this information. And it was a pretty shocking response from KSU. They're basically, well, don't say anything. Don't say anything. That's a serious problem. And if you saw in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, Brian Kemp has said, we're going to take a look at this. The contract with KSU comes up at the end of, I guess would have expired yesterday. And look, if Kennesaw State can't keep this data safe, then we've got to find another solution. And we'll see how Secretary Kemp handles this. But I guarantee you, if I'm Secretary of State, we're gonna clamp down on that, and we're gonna make sure they're doing everything they can to protect data. And we're gonna make sure we're doing everything we can to protect your data and your information that the Secretary of State's office holds. So that's critically important. One other thing that I'll mention about the Secretary of State's office, and then I'd love to have your questions. One other huge aspect that the Secretary of State's office works on is professional licensing. And professional licenses exist to protect the public from harm and fraud, right? Now, unfortunately, in recent years, we've seen a trend where some professional licensing boards, this is going on across the country, it's happening in Georgia, they come to the legislature and they say, we need to do this and that, and we need to raise the bar and make it tougher for people to get into that profession. And some of those ideas are good, but sometimes it's about crony capitalism, essentially. We've got enough people in our industry, we don't need any more, therefore we can raise the prices, and we have more of a monopoly on the marketplace. Now, there's already an entity in state government to deal with this. It's called the Georgia Occupational Regulation Review Council. Now, only government would come up with a name like that. But this Regulation Review Council is supposed to do two things. When one of us legislators proposes a new license, then they'll examine it and look at it, produce a report, and say, well, yes, we think this profession should be licensed, or no, we don't. And then they can provide that to the legislature, and we can examine that. And there was one I don't know if any of the legislators in the room remember this. We had a bill this year to license durable medical equipment providers. I voted against the bill because I actually read the report, and it said, don't license this profession. I doubt that that information was disseminated very widely in the legislature. So we've got to make sure that that information gets to the legislature so we can make an informed decision when we're considering a new license. Now, the second part of their jobs is once every several years, each licensing board is supposed to submit a report to the Regulation Review Council and explain why this profession needs to be continued to be licensed, and examine whether the regulations in that industry are too high. And so I called them up and I said, hey, where can I find these reports on these reviews? And they haven't done it. They've never done it. And I said, well, why don't you do it? The law, I'm looking right here at the law, and it says this is what you need to do. And they said, well, you folks in the legislature passed a law that makes us do zero-based budgeting. So we decided we have to do that, and we don't have the money to do this. I said, well, how much money do you need? We don't know. Have you submitted a budget request to the governor's office to get the money you need? No. So I introduced House Resolution 744 to draw attention to this, and either I intend to push this in the next legislative session. Either we're going to shame them into doing their job, or we're going to give them the money they need to do it. Now, the Secretary of State is one of the members of that board, and I can promise you, if I'm Secretary of State, that Regulation Review Council will do its job. It will examine each of these licensing boards, and we will root out and weed out any licenses not needed. Do we really need to license librarians? I don't really think we do, but we have a license for that in Georgia. And are we putting undue burdens on people who are trying to get into this industry? Now, why is this important? It's really very simple. It's something that we as conservatives all stand for. We want people to get jobs. We want people to have the freedom to pursue whatever profession they want to pursue. And when we raise barriers unnecessarily, we harm families. There's just no two ways about it. And that's what we're doing in Georgia, and it's happening across the country. And we've got to, in Georgia, fight against that tooth and nail, in my opinion. And so, thank you. Now, one last thing I'll say, and then we'll take some questions. One of my favorite movies is Braveheart. And there's this great scene in Braveheart that I'll remind you of. But, there's just so much cynicism in politics these days. People, I think, look at government and they look at politicians and they remember this line that Braveheart says. He looks at the Scottish nobles and he says, you think that the people exist to provide you with a position. But I think that your position exists to provide people with freedom. With so much cynicism out there, I think that a lot of folks are looking at politicians and thinking that they think that the people exist to give them a position. And that's not the case at all. And I know Senator Harbin, I know Josh, they don't look at public service this way. They look at it the other way, that our positions exist. Our positions exist and were created by our Constitution to go to the Capitol and to protect your freedom and to fight for your freedom and expand your freedom. And I believe that the Secretary of State is one of those offices. It exists to make sure that every citizen of Georgia has access to the polls and can participate in our democracy through an election, our republic through an election. I believe that the Secretary of State's office exists to make it easy for people to acquire the licenses they need to pursue whatever profession they want, pursue their version of the American dream. And so if I'm Secretary of State, I'm going to wake up every day, and I promise you, I'm going to be there remembering that my job is to fight for and protect your freedom as citizens of Georgia. So thank you for the time to be here today. And my website is voteforbuzz.com. You can find me on Twitter at Buzz Brockaway, at Facebook at Votes for Buzz, on Instagram at Buzz Brockaway. I used to have a Pinterest page, but I could never figure that out. And I know the ladies love Pinterest. My wife and daughters love Pinterest. But anyway, I'll be happy now to take any questions about anything you want to talk about, the Braves, Falcons, Secretary of State, whatever. So, ma'am, you had your hand up first?
I was curious about online voter registration with a motor vehicle information from a driver's license. I guess with a motor vehicle. What's the safeguards against fraud for that?
There's a two-step process. First, your driver's license, it's encoded in your driver's license, or maybe it's on the driver's license, that if you're not eligible to vote, it's stated on there and it's clear. But they also check it against, they look at your signature. Does the signature match? They look at and they check it against the Social Security database, looking at the last 4 digits. So there's a two-step verification when you use that online system.
One last thing, with opening the registration for people to register to vote in the runoff, I thought you had to have been registered and voted in the primary before you could do that. I might be mistaken.
Well, that was the law. And that court, and that court case is going on, and we'll see how the judge rules in the end. But it actually states in the Georgia Constitution that a runoff is considered a continuation of the same election, and that's where our voter registration was. We said we're going to cut it off 30 days before an election, and so a runoff is considered in Georgia law a continuation of the same election, which is why you couldn't register to vote afterward. So it muddled it up, and we'll see how the court case rules. We had a question then. Well, I'm going to pull rank on you. Senator Harbin's back there.
My question is this, and this is just my limited 3 years of experience. My question is, who regulates the regulators? And here's the issue, is that you and I, as legislators, ask for information, and it comes directly from that department. But there is no independent regulatory authority to regulate them. And I see that as a real problem, because when you ask the Department of Transportation or the Department of Education for information, their tendency is always going to be to slant it towards their benefit.
Yeah.
And I see that we have a problem with regulating the regulators and how we're going to put together. There's not an independent way for us to do that, to protect the people, because they're going to protect their jobs.
Yes. Oh, you're absolutely right. And listen, speaking of independent studies, this is not a shot at the governor, but the executive branch of the state of Georgia is one of the top 5 most powerful in this country. And so conversely, the legislature is one of the weakest. And I think one thing that we could do that would help that immediately and would get to exactly what you're talking about would be to give the legislature subpoena power. We don't have subpoena power in the state of Georgia. We can ask the Department of Transportation, for example, for information, and they can choose to give it to us or not. And there's not a whole lot of leverage that we can do other than to hold a press conference and raise heck about it. But if we had subpoena power, that would give us the ability, when we would ask for this information. If we don't get what we're looking for, then we issue a subpoena, just like Congress does all day long, when they issue subpoenas when they're not getting the cooperation that they need from a various executive branch agencies. So I think that'd be one simple thing. There's probably a whole lot of other things. And listen, related to that, we have this now that we have supermajority in the Senate. We're 2 votes, I think, short of supermajority in the House. We have the governor's mansion. We need to be looking at everything we can do to return power, to empower the legislature, who are elected by the people too, and to return power to the people of Georgia. And while we have, that was part of the problem that the Democrats had. They ran the state of Georgia for 130 years, and they assumed that that was a natural order of things and that they would run the state forever. And so they got cocky, and they got complacent. And we can't let that happen as Republicans. We have to stick to our principles. We have to look, even in the structuring of how we structure our state government. So I think that over the next few years, we need to look at those things and do all sorts of things along those lines to empower the people and empower the legislature. You right here, and then I see my friend Brandt over there. Yes, sir.
What is your stance on instant runoff voting or ranked choice voting?
I love it.
So would you be in favor of putting it on the ballot in like 2020 or something like that?
I don't think we need to put it on the ballot, but here's what I forgot to mention this.
What's the question?
His question is about ranked choice voting or instant runoffs. Basically what you do, for those who don't know, there are a number of cities that do this, and like other countries do this, like Australia has voted. Right. And basically what you do, if there are 3 people on the ballot or 5 people on the ballot, you rank them in order. I like this guy the best, this is my second favorite, third, fourth, fifth, etc. And then what happens is you don't have a runoff, because if there's 5 people in the race, the 5th place, and nobody gets a majority, the 5th place person drops out, and you take those people's preferences and apply those votes to other people, and you keep doing that process until you get somebody who has over 50%. So one thing that I forgot to mention, we have this 2-month runoff period in Georgia. We just brutally experienced it, all the poor folks in the 6th district, and we all had to suffer along with them because we had to see the commercials. It's brutal, and we can shorten that. Alabama does it, and the reason that we have this 2-month period under court order from the Department of Justice under President Obama, because military personnel and overseas voters have to be allowed 45 days to obtain an absentee ballot. Alabama does an instant runoff for overseas and military ballots. We should do that, and we should do that immediately. As soon as we can and do that. And that would shorten that, and then we could have a 1-month runoff. And then the second part of what you mentioned is Maine. The state of Maine passed a ballot initiative to implement instant runoffs statewide. And so I think that provides us tremendous opportunity. States are laboratories of democracy, right? So we can watch and see how it works in Maine. There are a number of big cities, San Francisco and Minneapolis, I think, that use instant runoff voting, and they like it, and it works very well. But we've never seen an election for a congressman or a governor or a senator using the instant runoff here in the United States. So we can watch Maine and see how it goes there and see how they implement it and what tweaks might need to be made. And then I think we need to put that on the table here for Georgians. Do we want to do this? Political consultants hate it because then they don't get to extract more fees during a runoff period. But it's very popular in the cities that use it. And obviously it passed statewide in Maine and seems to be very popular there as well. All right, we have one back there. Yes, ma'am.
I know that y'all were talking about giving non-citizens driver's license. Did that go through?
Well, all right, so here's what's going on. Okay, there is a law in Georgia, and what it says is if you're here in the United States and your citizenship status is challenged, then we don't take your driver's license away until the outcome of that case is decided. And I think that makes sense because in the United States you're innocent until proven guilty, right? So even when the government accuses you of not being a citizen, you have a day in court and you go and you say you have opportunity to provide proof whether you're a citizen or legally here or not. Legally here is the problem. It's not citizenship, it's legal status. And so when President Obama issued his executive orders, that threw, instead of having a handful of people in that status at any given time in the state of Georgia, now you have tens of thousands. And so it creates a lot of pressure and a lot of debate. So I think we need to tread very carefully because there's a reason that law exists. And I think the solution is in Washington. President Trump, and unfortunately he's kind of waffling on this, President Trump needs to rescind those executive orders, and he needs to lead the effort for immigration reform so that those people's status is determined by law, not determined by executive order. And then then we can go back in Georgia to what that law is intended to do, and that's to give people who have been accused by the immigration services of not being here, not having proper legal status, their day in court. Because my stepmother for a long, long time had a green card. And I can tell you, she's now a citizen, but dealing with that office is a real pain in the neck. And the false accusations, the paperwork screw-ups, and they attempt to deport people who are here properly and here legally all the time. So.
But when I got my driver's license, I had to give them a birth certificate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Georgia is now part of the Real ID system that Congress passed in the wake of the 9/11 attacks. So Georgia is now part of that. But listen, I mean, we allow non-citizens who are here legally to have driver's licenses. So you and I have to present a birth certificate. They have to present their green card or their legal status card.
Well, I guess my question, the reason I asked that, is how does that protect us for registering to vote online if you're using your driver's license? How does that ensure that non-citizens won't vote?
Because there's, as I mentioned earlier, there's an identifier on your driver's license that says that you have legal status but not to vote. And there's that two-step verification. So, Brant, you had a question?
Yes, sir. Two questions. With regard to regulating the regulators, there's no law we could pass that would institutionally force them not to protect their own turf. Maybe the solution is for you, Secretary of State, to appoint as many anti-statist, libertarian-minded people as possible, because as Plato said, there's no law that can make a good man bad, and there's no law that can make a bad man good.
That's a good point.
Well, my second question, so there's a suggestion, and my question is.
Good one, thank you.
Talking about ballot access, have you ever co-sponsored Representative Piesel's legislation to make it easier for third-party and independent candidates to get on the ballot?
I did not, but I had a bill actually that contained that. And it would have lowered the number of signatures required, and unfortunately, we just couldn't get it passed. We had to take it out of the bill, or the whole bill would have died. But I support increasing ballot access. I think our laws are way too harsh. Thanks for the question, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, you mentioned the Georgia Occupational Regulations Review Council. How are these people chosen?
It's department heads of various departments. I forget all the ones, but Secretary of State is one, the Director of Office of Planning and Budget. So it's either them or their designee. So it's specified in the code. You can actually go, just Google Georgia Occupational Regulation Review Council, and it'll take you to their little webpage, and you can see which offices are held. But it's a number of ones that would have some expertise. I don't know whose hand was next. I'll grab you. Yes.
A couple of things. The online voting,
Yeah.
it's just too easy to get in there and mess around with that. I'm uncomfortable with that
Yeah, well-
concept. And
Yep.
I think we need to change the attitude and narrative about registering to vote and voting is making it as easy as possible. I mean, we read about people in other lands that take their children by the hand and walk 30, 40 miles under threat of death to vote. It means something to them.
Right.
And frankly, people that can't get away from the computer long enough to go and register to vote are not going to spend the time researching the candidates and knowing something about how the government works, and we don't really want them voting, do we?
Well, as your first question was about, your first comment was about online voting. Yeah, we're not anywhere near being ready for that. We don't have anywhere near the security. Yeah, registration. Yeah.
Because I see a problem with that. You're saying there's an identity, but how easy is that to manipulate?
Well, there's several things. As I mentioned, there's that two-step process when you register to verify that you're a citizen. And then there's the other thing. Georgia is part of a consortium of states, about 30-something states, where we compare voter databases. And so we're looking for, if somebody moved from Georgia to Kansas, for example, that, well, all right, this person has shown up in 2 states, where do they really live? And we have the opportunity there's a process that you have to go through to remove people from the ballot. And we've got to be very vigilant about that. In Georgia, and we're part of that consortium, but there's another consortium that even goes a step further and compares the voter database to the Social Security records, which the Social Security Administration is very vigilant on when somebody passes away, they know. And we need to compare that to Georgia's database and say, all right, are there people who have deceased who are on our list? Keeping a clean voter list is crucial to making sure that we reduce fraud. Anytime there's
Dead Republicans vote Democrat.
Pardon?
Otherwise, dead Republicans vote Democrat.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, what was it? Huey Long was the old guy from Louisiana said, bury me in New Orleans Parish so I can continue to vote. These things happen. So, your point is well taken about, that there's a cost and a price to citizenship, right? And you should care. What I'm talking about, what I believe is my job if I'm Secretary of State, you're in charge of the election system. We're in charge of making sure that it's fair, making sure that every citizen has equal access to voting. And so when I talk about making it as easy as possible to register and to vote and doing all the things that we talked about of protecting our list, I view that as my job as Secretary of State. Now, take the Secretary of State hat off. And as a Republican, yes, I want voters to be educated. It's not really the job of Secretary of State to educate the voters. It's the job of Secretary of State to implement the laws that are passed and make it easy for folks to vote and make sure it's fair. It's the job of the Republican Party. It's the job of politicians. It's the job of candidates. It's the job of the Democratic Party. Educate voters and motivate them to get to the polls.
But Buzz, if we put you in that position of authority, you're saying, you're telling me now no longer are a Republican representing the party, you're representing everybody in the state, but your attitude and values do not come into play there?
No, I'm not saying that at all. Not saying that at all. But I'm saying the job of Secretary of State, when it comes to elections, is to make sure that the process works right and that all voters have equal access to the polls. That's the job of the Secretary of State. Right.
I have one more question. And
Sure.
It's one I ask every candidate. On the moral issues, I know they're called social issues now, but they're still moral.
Mhm.
All laws are moral. Would you consider yourself more libertarian leaning or GOP platform leaning?
GOP platform leaning. And here's why I say that. I know a lot of libertarians aren't necessarily pro-life. I'm very pro-life. I've been endorsed by both pro-life groups in Georgia, and I have as long as I've been in office. So I consider myself a Republican platform person more than libertarian.
Is that the issue, the single issue there?
No, it's not the only issue, but no, absolutely not. There's a lot of issues. Sure. I support traditional marriage. My wife and I lead a Bible study at our church to strengthen marriages, traditional marriages. So I'm for traditional marriage. I was one of the House co-sponsors of the Religious Freedom Bill in Georgia, as we carried it every year in the years we've done that. So, all those checklists, yeah. You look at any rating. I'm not going to be one who's going to stand up here and tell you I'm the most conservative person in this race. But I will tell you, you look at any list of conservatives, you're going to find my name among those people. I'm not going to sit here and thump my chest and say I'm more conservative than that guy. But I'm among the most conservative in the House.
We'll help you get over that. When you're more conservative.
Well, you misunderstood me, and forgive me for not portraying it clearly. There are a lot of outstanding conservatives in the House, okay? Fine, outstanding folks. It always bugs me when I see a candidate stand up and say, I'm the most conservative. And then they hold up some ranking system that put them at the top. But then another ranking system has as number 3, and another has as number 5, and yet they're going to thump their chests, and it's games. There's a group of solid conservatives. These two guys in the room are among those. I'm not going to stand here and tell you that I'm more conservative than Josh Bonner or more conservative than Marty Harbin. We're all conservatives, and we're all down there fighting about stuff. And you ought to see we get in rooms in the House, and we start debating bills. And you got a group of awesome, strong conservatives who passionately believe in the cause of liberty. But sometimes we disagree on bills, and we've had knockdown, drag-out arguments over particular bills. But then we hug each other and we go out and we vote our conscience. And that's more than anything, that's what I believe. I believe in the absolute right of conscience. And Josh and I are buddies, and we mostly vote alike. But every now and then there's a bill we vote differently. And I respect the heck out of him. And he respects the heck out of me because we know where we're coming from and how we come at it. And Marty Harbin will be the same way. I guarantee you, we compare our voting records, it's really close. But there'll be a few we disagree on. And I respect the heck out of him because I know he's coming down there from his viewpoint and honestly arriving at each and every vote. So that's what I'm getting at. I'm not going to thump my chest and say, I'm more conservative than this guy or that guy.
Thank you for clarifying.
Thanks. So I get passionate. Absolute right of conscience, I think, is one of the huge problems in politics today. We look at somebody and we say, I disagree with that person. We've gone from Reagan, who said, an 70% friend or 80% friend is 100% enemy. Reagan was against that sort of stuff, and we've gone to I'm a 99% friend is 100% enemy because we disagree on one issue, and that's hurting us as a Republican Party, I think. So, we had one back there, yes, sir.
First a comment and a couple questions. If I'm hearing you, or as I'm hearing you, it sounds to me like you're making a stand for integrity.
I hope so, yes, sir.
In that sense, God bless you, go forth and may your tribe increase. Hate to lose a person of integrity like this in the House. So, do you have somebody lined up to fill your seat once you resign? And then number 2, once elected as Secretary of State, how aggressive will you be in prosecuting issues such as defending the integrity of the election system? Where in Bryan County had an abject failure to perform his duty, I think, it was dereliction of duty, that he failed to appeal Judge Batten's ruling. And, just let it stand, and
Yeah.
quite clear that, when we have an election and a runoff for this continuation of the same election, otherwise it should have been reopened for new people to register.
Yeah.
I mean, not to vote, but to be in the race.
Right. So the first part of your question, I don't have a hand-picked successor, but there are 2 or 3 folks who I consider good, solid conservatives who are going to run for my seat in the House. And I think I'll let the people choose which one of those 3 they want, but I think you're going to get a good conservative elected in that district. Prosecuting voter fraud. One of the Secretary of State, I met them when I took a tour of the Secretary of State's office. They have a group of armed folks, former law enforcement folks, whose job it is to go out and investigate fraud of all sorts, securities fraud and all the many things that the Secretary of State's office does. And voter fraud is one of those things. Absolutely, I will throw the book at those folks. And listen, it gets...
Talk about appealing lawsuits.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and absolutely, and we'll fight in court. You have to get the cooperation of the Attorney General. But I think when it comes, we're going to make sure that we're standing on firm legal footing, and then we're going to ask our Attorney General to fight this exactly, to fight this as far as we can fight it until we get the outcome that we believe is the right outcome. So yeah, I'm going to fight. I'm a lover, not a fighter, but I'm a fighter too, so don't mess with me. So. We had some others. Yes, sir, you had your hand up. Sorry, right behind you in the purple shirt, he had his hand up for you, sir. Sorry.
This is a status question. Several months ago, Secretary Kemp indicated that Department of Homeland Security had attempted to penetrate our voting system. And
Yeah.
he was not alone, several other states. I haven't heard anything about where that stands.
Yeah, so where it stands is this. The Department of Homeland Security investigated and declared themselves innocent. And that news came out the other day. Look, what really happened is, and we have to be careful in the terms we use, there was a port, what they call a port scan, and that's essentially looking for points of access to see if there's a point of weakness. And thankfully, they didn't find one. So that's what happened, and it tracing it back, Secretary Kemp traced it back, and it appears that if it came from a Department of Homeland Security computer. That's concerning, because either you had a rogue employee or you had somebody who had gained access, was cloning that computer to make it look like a Department of Homeland Security's. I don't really know that we've gotten to the bottom of it yet, but as far as the Secretary of State's office goes. We've got to be on guard against those things all the time. There's going to be attempted hacks all the time. We've got to be vigilant and fight those things and do everything we possibly can. And we've got the resources here in Georgia. We've got top cybersecurity experts. We need to, in the private sector, we need to pull those in. And in every area of government, this is a huge concern. Every area of government, I think we need to partner with the experts in the private sector to help us and advise us and show us how to properly construct our security measures to make sure we don't. That next time there's a port scan, they don't find a weakness and exploit it. Eric, yes, sir.
2 quick ones.
Y'all tell me when, Mr. Chairman, you tell me when we've had enough. But I'll take questions all day. So, all right, good.
Please confirm your primary is what, May next year?
Yeah.
Okay. Do you have any current known opponents for the Republicans?
Yeah, there's several Republicans running. There's numerous rumored Republicans, and we'll see who steps up and runs. But there's a couple Democrats too.
Thank you.
It's going to be a full field.
If I have a question, I know others might have the same one. Now back to the more important, pressing one for me in Peachtree City. Next year, I hope we will have a unanimous council vote to say we want to move our elections from odd years to even years.
Okay.
Right now, we're getting 20%
Yeah.
turnout this November for mayor. Next year, if we were to do it, it'd be over 70%.
Yeah.
I would hope that Josh and Mr. Harvin would help us move that through, because we need legislative action to change that. Would you be able to help us guide our way through this?
So here's how it works when it comes to local legislation. the rest of us, if your guys and your delegation decide that, yeah, they want to move that forward, the rest of the House and Senate will go along with it. That's generally how it's done. Philosophically, it's probably a good idea. Whatever we can do to get more civic engagement and more citizens feeling engaged and educated on who their elected officials are and what the issues are in each race, that's a good thing, I think. So I'll follow their lead, and you work with them, and if they want to push it forward, I'll support them.
Well, thank you, because I know right now, whoever gets 3,000 votes in November for mayor is going to win. And that's a ridiculous percentage of the 20-plus thousand registered voters.
There was an election not long in Georgia in a small city. I can't remember which one. Nobody showed up to vote. 0 people showed up to, not even the candidates themselves who were names were on the ballot. So, yeah, so low turnout's a problem.
Hopefully we'll work on that early next year.
Yeah. Others? The Hawks traded Dwight Howard. I think it's a good thing. So
They did what with Dwight Howard?
they traded Dwight Howard. That was good stuff.
That was a good move.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. Thank you.